Good evening. Now, tonight, I have, as you can see on the other side of the studio, Caroline Stevens with me. Hello, Caroline. Good evening. And
good evening, Chris. Or is
hello.
it Eric?
Or
Hello,
Eric,
and
hello
hello to the audience who couldn't see your post earlier because for some reason your post on Facebook didn't reach a wider audience.
Perhaps I've been a
What
naughty
happened
boy.
there?
I don't know. Perhaps I should write to the chap who runs Facebook, and he might say, you've been a very naughty boy. You've been saying rude things. You've been saying naughty words, and you're going to sit in a corner with a dunce's cap on for the next couple of weeks. But that's Facebook for you. I've been posting since lunchtime. But what we're going to talk about tonight is what's happening with our children at school, what's happening with social services, and very strange things that are going on that are not covered by the mainstream media. I wonder why. But if you look at the way communism works, and I know the audience are thinking, oh no, it's not about communism again. It's all right, I am. It's like a jigsaw puzzle with the pieces. And if you understand and study communism, you will understand why our children are being indoctrinated with sex education in infant schools, why men dressed in drag are teaching little infants, and why the most horrendous things are happening. Because under a communist system, parents are only there to produce the children. The state bring them up because the state need to indoctrinate the children. And that's, Ray, the way it works. Now, I was horrified when I heard Caroline's talk earlier this week about what is actually happening with children being abducted by not aliens, but social services and other such things. So, Caroline, can you fill the audience in? What on earth is going on with our children? And I know it's terrifying. You know more about this than I do. So take it away, Caroline.
Thank you. I mean, we talk about the Tavistock Institute and brainwashing and new systems in force. So over the past 10 days, I've interviewed two new people to me, who have both had respectively 2 and 8 children removed from them by the state. And the state has now this new loophole, if you like, to be able to take your children off you if they can provide a good enough reason in a family court to suggest that you are not a fit parent, or you could be not a fit parent in the future. So you might have had an eating disorder when you're younger. You may have shoplifted. I don't know. But basically, something gets flagged. As soon as you are flagged by the state, then you risk losing all your children. And I was just only talking to a grandmother just before we came on air. And she's a great friend of mine. And she said, Caroline, she said, it's so incredible. And I said, I know that this happens in my own town. As soon as a child is flagged to the school, it is part of the regulations that the school has to immediately contact social services. And at that point, social services can see your child. You don't know your child has been seen by social services, and the social services offer that child a contact in the police force. They ask the child, do they want a police person to come and see them? So this is very real. it obviously didn't happen years and years ago. And unless you've got grandchildren in school, unless you run into this situation, you would just be going around, going about your own business, and you would not know this. This is a very real situation. So we've got £75,000, 75,000 children in care at the last count, but they can't give an accurate count because when children are taken away from their parents in by secret courts, the certificates don't have a number on, so it's not so easy for the state to say how many children are actually being taken into care, and some of these homes are actually unauthorized by the state. So you've got all this going on. And then we've got at the same time this indoctrination by our government, this enforcement, if you like, of a new agenda into the curriculum from the age of 4 at primary school level for the teachers to be opening up the discussion for children to decide, are they a girl? Are they a boy? We're looking at this gender realignment, if you like. What are our children going to make of this? And it was funny because I was talking to a parent today. She's same age as myself, and we were talking about when our children were in primary school. And she said, do you remember when the children all used to sit on the mat when they were about 4 or 5, and they used to do something called show and tell? So the idea was at the time was for children to bring in something from home. They wanted to show it to the people, to the children, and then they wanted to tell a story about that item. Well, this LGBT agenda surely gives a new dimension to show and tell, doesn't it, Chris?
Precisely. But getting other pieces of the jigsaw puzzle, I was in contact with a Canadian who said that in Canada, Justin Trudeau has just passed a law where if a child wants to have the operation to turn from a boy to a girl or the other way around, it is illegal to talk that child out of it. And you can actually be fined a phenomenal amount or imprisoned for talking the child out of having that operation. Now that
that sort of leads me into the vaccination program, because obviously we've been hearing a lot about the coronavirus, and somebody sent me a link from Instagram, and it was a case of in their mind they can see now that parents who don't allow their children to be vaccinated will end up not only by losing their children, but they will also end up by being in some sort of camp themselves. And that's exactly how I saw the LGBT agenda. Because if you read the small print, there is a very real prospect of, this show and tell. It's the teachers that are going to be telling on the parents who don't allow their children to be part of this brainwashing LGBT agenda. Now, this LGBT agenda is quite interesting because it emanates from this campaign group called Stonewall. Now, I'll be perfectly honest, I haven't followed Stonewall avidly. It's just not been something that I've really, really focused on. But I do seem to recall, and maybe some of your viewers can pull me up on this, but I remember that they were able to get away with putting adverts onto buses in London promoting Stonewall.
Yes, I remember that. Peter Tatchell, I believe, there's a person that I really can't stand.
And the
And
people behind Stonewall are just people like Mandelson and Matthew Paris, who writes for the Times. That depends on standing, Caroline. Hello, Mark. What do you mean that depends on standing?
I don't understand. Sorry. Can you
Oh
explain?
gosh, he's
Sorry.
been studying his legal books. So yes, so we've got Mandelson, Matthew Paris, and these guys have been at this agenda for decades, and now they must be laughing their socks off because they've got this supposed Sun King Boris Johnson to be able to get this agenda into the school curriculum. And, you know, before they used to have LGBT in primary schools, insofar as in sex education, but children at that point could be pulled, they could be removed from sex education. But now they're putting it in lessons where the children cannot be removed. So it's going to be transparent for all to see which parents are not happy. Well, basically, it's not going to be transparent. It was transparent before where the parents could take the children out, but the parents are now under some sort of commitment not to take the children, not to remove them out. And of course, it's been a lot of the Muslim population that have been actually protesting about this. So we need to bring them on board, don't we?
Well, precisely. But going back to what you were saying, let's say you've got a child who falls off his or her bike and grazes their knee and has a few bruises, and then goes to school the next day, and the teacher says, "Oh, you've got these grazes and bruises." Now, children are very impressionable. And I remember there was a case when I was very, very young. My parents told me about it when I was much older. There was an elderly man that lived where we used to live. And he used to sit at the gate. He was married, and he very old he was. And he used to sort of talk to the children as they came home from school. Very innocent. Their innocent days must have been the 1960s because I was very young at the time. And I found out about this when I was much older. And there was a little girl we talked to, and when she got home, the parents were not very nice parents, and they put things into her mind. Did this man do this? Did he say this? Did he do this? Blah 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 and all this. And of course, if you put something into a child's mind, they're going to react on it. I mean, I'm not a child psychologist or anything like that, but I remember when I was a child, and you remember when you were a child, and I'm sure our audience remember when they were children, you're very impressed by things. You know, if an adult says, oh, I don't know, did you see such and such a thing? You say, oh, yeah, you know, and all this sort of thing. Anyway, cutting a long story short, the police were called in and the man was arrested, and he was completely innocent. And luckily, in those days, police psychologists, the policewoman interviewed the little girl, and she'd realised that the parents had put thoughts into this little girl's mind, and the man was totally innocent. And about a week or two after the case was all closed, he was innocent. He died, and I think it just destroyed him. It really did.
I was going to say he'd probably be totally worn out.
He was. And now I didn't know this. I was told about 10 years afterwards. I said, well, I wonder, you know, my parents told, because I was too young to understand it. But when they told me, you know, it was very upsetting. An elderly man. And I don't remember talking to him, but I do remember him vaguely, you know. But what I'm going to say is, if you have a child and that child falls off their bike and grazes them, you know, hurts themselves, and then the teacher takes them to one side and puts a lot of ideas into that child's mind. Next thing, I should think the social services would be called in, and the parents would lose that child. They'd have to have a very good reason why that child is bruised. And I should think there's lots of cases like that going on now. I mean, is there, Caroline?
Well, that's a really, really good point, because I was thinking that when these children, there's an increase in autism.
Yes.
I mean, you know, yes. Exactly. They're not our enemy. We need to bring everybody together. It's the state that's our enemy. The elites. So basically, oh gosh, I'm off my stride now. What was I talking about, Chris?
What I was saying if a child came off a bike and bruised themselves, injured themselves.
Oh yes, well that's right. So basically, I've heard these mums say to me, "Well, a child has been manhandled at nursery by one of the nursery assistants," and when they've said to somebody else, "Oh, there's been a problem. See the marks down the side of the body," it's gone back on to the parents. They've actually said, no, 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 it's not happened in the nursery. This has happened before they came to school. So it's like everything is put back on the parent all the time. And I've known this. I've spoken to parents, and this is what they've said. So you've got this rise in autism. You've got a rise in so many problems, medical problems with children because of the food we eat and the water we drink and the chemical trails. And it's a case of there's going to be a greater increase in the number of medical problems with the children. And then when the parents complain they're about, say, the child can't drink or can't eat or has snuffles, then they say, oh, it must be something that's happening at home. And then the child gets taken off the parents, that they're neglectful. But it's simply because, children have been taken off parents, and it's been like months or years later where social services have said, oh, yes, the child did have a medical problem, say from birth, and it had gone undiagnosed. But the child isn't given back to the parents. And children are being like split up as well. Because I was talking to a mum last week, and I'm going to be interviewing her tomorrow again for part 2. So two boys were taken away, and they started fighting because they were at the same house. And one boy, in his own mind, he's a child. He said, Mum, I wanted to fight with my brother because I thought I would make life so difficult for the foster parents. They would give us back to you. But of course, that's not what social services do. A 10-year-old isn't going to know what's really, really going on. So, I just find it's heartbreaking that no parent is perfect, but 95% of children will fare so much better being with their families than without their families.
Well, that's right. But let's all take a step back for a moment and look at this. As I said sort of earlier, we've got like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle that are giving us little bits of the picture. And I think we can join those jigsaw pieces together and see most of the picture. And I'm going to start talking about communism again. So, okay, you may well make a cup of tea, audience. He's waffling on about communism, but I'll be brief about it. Let us look at every communist agenda or look in the past of what happened to communism. And I'll be very, very brief as possible. When Mao got into China in 1949, that's when the communists won, the first thing they did was to gradually separate the children from their parents, so that from an early age there was a propaganda that the state know better than the parents. Okay, so everybody had to work. So mother and father went to work, and the child was looked after by nurseries and state-run nurseries. So when you came to the Cultural Revolution, which was between 1966 and 1976, the children, because they've been separated from their parents at an early age and were indoctrinated by the state, they would put their parents away without any qualms at all, without any conscience at all, because they had no link with their parents because they've been indoctrinated by the state. So you had people, innocent parents, being arrested, never seen again. And there's now adults in their 60s or 50s and 60s who did this, put their parents away in the 1960s and 70s who now feel very conscious about it because they actually got their parents killed. But at the time, they thought they was doing the right thing. Now let's very briefly go to Europe. And I remember in the late 60s, early 70s, when the Cold War was on, one of the satellite states, now I can't remember, I think it was Czechoslovakia, but it might have been Hungary. I don't know. Our viewers might be able to correct me on this. There was a documentary that showed that in the former Soviet Union, men and women were looked on as the same. Okay, there's this gender similarity. So women did men's jobs. I mean, we could never have that in this country, could we? You know, like lady firemen. Oh, we do. Sorry. Anyway, that was communism. And once the child was born, I don't know. I think it was a matter of weeks. The woman had to go back to work and the child had to go to a day nursery where it was brought up. And then at the age of 7, the child was permanently dragged away from their parents for about 2 years to go to a kind of indoctrination camp to get political indoctrination. Now, what happened is after that documentary, it sent shockwaves through the country. And remember, this was the late 60s. And there was people, they didn't have phone-ins, but they had people writing in saying to radio programs and that, saying, what are those children going to be brought up like in their early years, every day when their mother's working? Because in those days, remember, in the late 60s, early 70s, mother stayed at home and looked after the children. Mothers didn't work until the child was old enough to look after themselves. My mum didn't go to work. She looked after me and my sister. Now, and the main attitude of people then, they were in shock, and they said, nurseries, because remember, we didn't have nurseries, and only rich people had nurseries in those days. Nurseries, what are those children going to be grow up like, being brought up not by their parents, but by complete strangers? And these strangers in these nurseries have to work to a government system. And that was shock. They said, oh, it would be terrible if this ever happened in Britain. Look what's happened. Because of usury, women now have to work and put their children into day nurseries. And you notice this is the slow creep of communism. It's a very slow process. But you look back at the look back at the former Soviet Union and look what they did. And we are doing almost the same. And all it is, it's indoctrination of children. Full stop. That's it. And it's terrifying. If you study communism like I have done for about 40 odd years, you can see it like a rabbit in the headlamps of an oncoming car. It's coming at you. And you think, oh, people wake up. This is communism.
Wow. Well, yes. I mean, because obviously I look back and just think about the credit system you get when you're a new mum, and, you know, the number of hours you can have in a nursery per week, and you know, parents who have a small amount of, and of course, yes, I mean, I was only reading an article about a new boarding school that has been set up, and it's set up for children from the age of 8, for basically children whose both their parents go out to work and they can't actually fit their child or children in their day because they're getting home at 8 o'clock at night. So their 8-year-old gets packed off to a boarding school, which I think it's something like £11,500 a year. And yes, that's I can see this. And not only that, but, you know, you can see that parents will also be separated from their children if they refuse to allow them to be subjected to the LGBT agenda in schools. And, you know, this Instagram account that I was reading, the vaccines, if you're a parent and you refuse to allow your children to be vaccinated, then who knows what's going to happen to the parents? Again, they'll be in the camps, the children will be removed from them, and then they'll be in these schools, these boarding schools, these state-run schools, presumably. So we can see now it hasn't. When you say it's like mission creep, isn't it? It's been slowly creeping along. And when people say they keep falling for the same old on the media, we must vote Tory because, oh, that big bad Corbyn, we don't want him in. And I'm saying, well, what difference would it make? And they say, oh, well, he's a socialist. And I'm thinking, well, can you not see that Boris Johnson is uh, is bringing in global communism? So which would you prefer? Is there going to be any difference? Boris Johnson and his little team. Well, actually, he's doing all this on his own, isn't he? The way the media, I mean, the media has really turned on him, and insofar as because they just play things by both sides, and they're getting the anger bit now in people that people surely must be realizing that Boris Johnson is not their friend. He is the friend of the banksters. So he's said yes to HS2, the most expensive vanity project in history. And but that's all right because he's a Tory. I mean, people's minds, why do they think that just because he wears a blue tie, if you like, a blue rosette, that he's okay? He's the Trojan horse, surely.
Well, precisely. I'm going to bore people again because, as I've said loads of times before, governments do not run or rule. Sorry, they don't rule countries. The banks rule countries with their usury scam, and they're unelected. And unelected civil servants run countries, and the governments are there as a kind of illusionist to give you the illusion of freedom and democracy. No, it isn't. If you want freedom and democracy, get rid of usury. But I've worked, talking about children, I've worked with ex-public school kids. When I say ex-public school kids, they're adults, because a lot of architects and engineers I work with went to public school because they had a rich mummy and dad.
How come you got that in then?
Well, I'm an architectural technician, so we're the scum of the earth. We're the blokes that got to try and translate what the public school Chinless Wonders design and sort of translate it so that some bloke on site with his cigarette in said, well, this looks at the plans, because when you look at architectural drawings, most of them are done by technicians. But that's another story. But not all, but the majority of ex-public school kids that I've worked with had a psychiatric problem. And there was one that I know in particular who had to regularly go to a psychiatrist because he was packed off to public school at a very early age. His parents were overseas. I think his parents were in Beirut or somewhere like that. They're English. And he had to go to public school in Britain. And it's a bit like when the Japanese POW camps were liberated in World War II. And they said, how was it? And one of the chaps said, well, compared with public school, this POW camp wasn't too bad. Mm-hmm. That just about sums it up. But really, a lot of these ex-public school people, a lot of them were psychopaths. Not all. Some were very nice people. There were some that weren't twisted. They probably went to a good one. But the majority of them I worked with, there was something psychologically wrong, and they had to go to psychiatrists. They were on antidepressants because they didn't have any parental love or guidance from an early age, because the only guidance they had was from different nannies and different teachers. And it was groupthink, because you think about it, if you're packed off to a nursery, you learn groupthink from an early age. And that's communism. They don't want individualism. They want groupthink. Have you noticed we use the word community? Community has been used a lot because you've got to be part of a community. And most of the people that's made strides in this world, people like Tesla, Henry Ford, and that, they were individuals. Communism does not allow individualism because they're dangerous individuals. You've just got to be bland, boring. And look at society now. You look at the 1960s and you look how creative it was with music. Look at the stage sets, look at films, look at almost everything, fashion. There was an explosion of creativity. What creativity have we got now? All right, we've got computers, smartphones, and that, but they come from the Far East. there's no real creativity, is there? It's
Well, I
bland.
guess so. I mean, you talk about public school, Boris Johnson, George Osborne, Theresa May, um, David Cameron, Prince Charles. They all went off. And are they well balanced individuals?
Well, especially George Osborne. Don't mention anything about pigeons. I suppose you know about that, do you?
Don't mention maths. What did you say? Don't mention etchings.
No, no pigeons. Well,
Pigeons. I don't know anything about what George Osborne and pigeons.
there may
Tell
be
me, please.
maybe children listening in, so I'll be very polite. He allegedly went with a prostitute who wrote a book. This was about, when was George Osborne around? 7-8 years ago, something like that. She wrote a book. Can't remember her name. I'm sure one of our viewers will be able to enlighten me on this. And he was member of what was it, the something set, who birds £10 or £20 notes in front of tramps and
Oh no,
homeless.
that was Cameron and Boris Johnson, wasn't it?
No, it was George Osborne. There was a picture of George Osborne with this prostitute, and the prostitute said that how can I put this politely? They used to part of their initiation into their particular
Bullingdon
Club was,
yeah, they were all a member of the Bullingdon Club.
Yes, thanks for helping me there. Was to get a young pigeon and insert it into a part of their anatomy. I think I've been rather subtle in that, but
and these are the sort of people that we allow to run the UK.
That's right. They put the head of the pigeon in. But I'd say I think I've been subtle enough, and I'm sure our listeners or viewers will be able to understand what I'm talking about. If only I can remember what the woman's name was now, but she actually spoke on not on national radio, but she spoke about this on the internet. And if you look it up, if you tap in George Osborne and pigeons or something, I'm sure you'll Google it, you'll find it. And
it was dead. Was the pigeon dead then?
Well, it would have been afterwards, not before. It was alive.
Oh my goodness me!
Yeah.
That is really sick. And he's the chief executive of Northern Powerhouse.
Well,
giving evidence to people like Michelle Donnellan in Parliament. So it just makes the whole scenario totally ridiculous. And also George Osborne is a Bilderberger. So the fact that he was giving evidence to our Parliament shows that that is a treacherous situation in the first place, regardless of pigeons. The fact that you're taking evidence from a foreign power. Remember the Bill of Rights of 1689. Why does our government take advice from Bilderbergers?
Precisely. And what that she was a very nice person, this prostitute, said was that her clients would not have been ordinary working class people. Never. The most kinkiest and weirdest. They were all public school of George Osborne's ilk. And she said he told her that whilst in a taxi, whilst I was going somewhere. But he used to smoke drugs, allegedly. That's what she said. And I can't remember the woman's name. I would have been prepared if I know I was going to speak about this, but I didn't know I was going to talk about pigeons. But if your viewers look it up after the programme, I've also, if you look at my website, Fockham Hall, and if you look at Fockham Hall Radio, and if you look at my newspaper that I used to do, which is the Fockham Hall Times, there's and one of those editions, I did a little, shall we say, satirical article about George Osborne and his time with the young lady of the night, shall we say. So,
well, I mean, okay, but talk about the Bullingdon Club. I mean, I did read an article, and I thought, I'm sure it was Boris Johnson and David Cameron allegedly that were burning £50 notes. But that aside, David Cameron and a pig's head. Does anybody remember that?
Oh yes, sorry, someone just said, "Good job, it
Yeah.
wasn't a woodpecker." Sorry, that's a classic. That's Ralph.
Oh
Thanks,
my
Ralph.
gosh.
Oh yeah, I remember the pig's head
That would
because
bring water to you. That would bring tears to your eyes, wouldn't it? So,
I don't, yeah.
I mean, David Cameron and a pig's head. Remember the mouth of
Well,
the pig?
I did an actual satirical item on Fogham Hall Times. If you look up Fogham Hall, FoghamHallRadio.com, and look onto the Fogham Hall Times, I did a satirical article because I said that David Cameron was actually going to go into producing pig's head sausages, and you've got to be very careful. I won't go on, but you'll see what I mean.
Actually, though, that comes quite nicely round to the start of the show because we were talking about negligence in looking after our children. David Cameron, did his family not leave one of their children behind once in a pub?
Yes.
Now, if you or I had done that, the police would have been called, and it's very, very likely that our children would have been taken away from us in this current day.
That's
Now,
right.
did David Cameron have his children taken off him? Not at all.
Well, probably he very rarely sees them, and it's a bit like car keys. What do I do with the car keys? And people say, "How's your children?" Oh, yes, little what's her name? Because they very rarely see their children. I actually work with an engineer who was going to do a contract somewhere. I think it was in the Far East. And him and his wife were all keen because it was a couple of year contract. He said, I'm going to pack the kids off, he said, to public school. He said, the amount I'll be earning, I'll be able to afford it. He said, and we'll see him in a couple of years' time. And I said, so you
unbelievable, isn't it?
Years. And he looked on them like you would look on, say, a tin of beans, oh, well, I bought a tin of beans, I shove them on the shelf, and sort of, I might use them. And I thought, it was so cold, and we're gonna have a great time I think it was Singapore he was going to, or some place like that. We're gonna have a great time there, and yeah, it's great, all this and So I said, well, what about your children? Well, we've had our kids, it's a joy of birth and that. And I said to the wife, we'll see them in a couple of years' time.
I tell you something. I reflect that. I mean, it's difficult not to judge, isn't it? Because obviously people are different, but that isn't the way that I would see bringing up your children. I've got a friend, or I did have a friend, I should say, who had her children in nursery 5 days a week from a very young age. And, even when she actually had a day off work as holiday, because she'd paid for the childcare, she never saw the children. She just continued, she just kept the children in childcare. And I'm thinking, well, wow, aren't we all just different?
Well, we are, but the big problem is, I mean, I'm no child psychologist or anything like that, but up to the age of about 7, the child needs its mother, whether it's a boy or girl. You need your mother and a father who's there to protect you. Now, that's been the same for thousands of years. How comes we're changing the science now? Because men are men and women are women. I was talking to a farmer once, and he said that women are not built to do the fireman's carry. And he's an ex-fireman, and he said, it was quite frightening because they couldn't actually carry a person from a burning building like a man could, because we're men, different physique. And this identical that women are the same as men. No, men are different and women are different. And women are good at things that men can't do, and vice versa. And again, this is communism. Communism, there's no difference between the sexes. It's equality. And you look at the former Soviet Union in the 60s and 70s, there's women on building sites doing the work of men because everybody had to work. And I bet you there's a lot of people would be now in their 50s and 60s in the Soviet Union that are really screwed up because they never saw their, or very rarely saw their parents when they were young. Because there's that nurturing, there's that, it's just the family unit. It's natural. You go to the most primitive tribes, you'll still have the family unit, still be there.
To be honest, I mean, people misunderstand what we're talking about. Perhaps it's not a case of you being sat there and having to do colouring and arranging lots of activities for your children. It's just being there. They call it pootling about time. You've just got to be pootling about in the vicinity of your child, in the same house. You've got to just be there when the child comes in, wants a drink. You don't need to have all this regimentation in a nursery, because that's how nurseries generally work, because they have maybe 8 children to 1 adult. So you can imagine, if you've got 8 children, you've got to have some sort of rules there. And then you're talking about your communism, your socialism. If you don't have rules, it's very difficult for 1 adult to keep tabs on 8 children. And so they cannot possibly have the freedom, they cannot possibly be able to think outside the box without it being some sort of negative for the adult, because an adult cannot cope with 8 children doing all different things, thinking in different ways and going to the toilet at different times, etc., etc. They have to fit some sort of rota system in the nursery.
Well, that's right. But again, it's group think. And you look at the House of Commons, most of the people there are group thinkers. They're not individualist thinkers. And everything is of an agenda. And all the time it's community, this community, that community. And housing, they want us all to be living in these smart cities. Why? Because if you're living in a little box, you can't be creative, can you? It's very difficult because you've got everybody around you. You've got stresses and strains. I mean, look at the stress that's put on children nowadays. A poor kid can't actually have a childhood. Once upon a time, a kid could run into the woods, climb up a tree, fall off, and oh dear, just grazed my ankle. I won't do that again. You learn by experience. Now, little darling, don't cut the tree. Don't do this. Don't do that. Children can't have a childhood anymore. Look at exams. Now, some people can go into a room, have lots of information blasted into them, memorize it, go to an exam, get everything right in the exam, but I've got no common sense, or no such thing as common sense, but common sense would...
No, you can't have common sense. No. Common sense gets knocked out of you at school. Common sense actually gets knocked out of you in the workplace, because you can't have employees. You see, the thing is about people get this wrong about job interviews. You get preened up, don't you? You wear your best clothes. You have the best little storylines, the best CV. So you're preening around like a peacock. But in actual fact, when they've employed you, they actually just generally, 99% of jobs just want you to be a penguin. And there's actually somebody who's written a book about peacocks and penguins, and that's exactly it. So how are we going to finish this show off, Chris? Because we've already covered quite a broad area of topics, really, although all about education and communism.
Well, that's right. And I would have studied up a little bit about George Osborne beforehand, so I could have given the names and things like that. But I didn't know he was going to go on to that subject.
Well, it may be just as well, just in case you get sued, because I don't want this video putting on my YouTube channel, just in case we get sued.
Hang on, I'll just say allegedly what happened with George Osborne.
Absolutely. Question mark at the end.
Question mark. But I'm not saying it did happen, not saying it didn't happen.
Google the Bullingdon Club and what those boys got up to. And they do say that with single-sex education, the girls really benefit from that, but the boys don't. So there you go.
There we go. Well, I think on that note, I think we better round this up. And I'd like to thank everybody in the chat room. Thank you very much. And nobody helped me with the name of that woman who wrote the book. Never mind.
I know you better not. You've dug yourself a hole now. You're going to have to find out the name of that book.
Yeah, I'm going to have to find it. And thank you very much for joining us. And join us again soon. I'll be back on air on Thursday. I don't know whether you're morning or evening. We'll work that one out. But thank you very much for joining us, and join us again soon. And
Thank you.
Good night, Caroline.
Bye. Good night.